When this orca found herself beached on the jagged rocks, she screamed and whimpered for her pod to come rescue her. Although her family was unable to assist her, the actions of the rescuers are amazing. When Eric Keane decided to look into weird sounds he heard while sailing the seas surrounding British Columbia early one July morning in 2015, he discovered that one of the last places you would expect to encounter an orca is on dry ground. Welcome to USA Stories channel. Do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell button to receive all new updates. Now let's go to the story. Whale researcher Eric heard somber screams from a little protrusion of jagged stone on the edge of Andrew Rocks while he was on his ship, the Bangarang, studying fin whales in the region. A juvenile orca was clearly distressed as it became more and more out of the water and jammed between jagged rocks. At around 7:30 a.m., Eric phoned the local conservation organization Whale Point to inform them of his discovery, according to Janie Ray, Herman Muter, and Save Our Seas. The orca specialists understood what must have happened based on Eric's description. In that region, pods of orcas would frequently work together to hunt seals for food, with some pursuing the seals along the coast and others waiting patiently to set the trap. It seems likely that this young female orca misjudged her location and ended out in increasingly shallow water as the tide went out, leaving her stranded between the rocks with no way out. Thankfully, Eric was sailing close by when she screamed for assistance, clearly terrified and likely in agony. Janie and Herman knew Eric well and frequently collaborated with him on their study. He informed them about the juvenile orca's predicament as they were returning to their base from Hartley Bay. Janie and Herman were aware that they would require all available assistance, and that time was of the importance. They thus called two marine groups, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, DFO, and Gitga'at Guardians in Hartley Bay, to inform them of the juvenile orca's dire circumstances while they hurried north to join Eric in Squally Channel. In the meantime, Eric and his team went up to the orca to ask if they might assist her in escaping the rocks. In order to prevent her from becoming startled and maybe hurting herself in an attempt to flee, they first avoided getting too near to her. With actuality, the rocks were covered with barnacles, which may have caused cuts to her flesh, so if they had attempted to pull her or move her off of them, they would have seriously hurt her. She was bleeding somewhat from her tail and pectoral region as it was. When Janie and Herman arrived, Eric found out that DFO's John Ford and Paul Cottrell had instructed him via satellite phone to keep the orca cold and moist until the tide rose again, at which point she would be able to break free. But it would be another 8 hours until the tide rose again, so the marathon rescue started. The orca was clearly nervous about their intentions when they initially came near her. For a baby killer whale, being confined, uncomfortable, and surrounded by people must have been rather frightening. Gravity was clearly making it more difficult for her to breathe, which was shallow and rapid. Using a hose and some duct tape, Eric cleverly constructed a makeshift water pump. He then proceeded to the island's backside to operate the pump for Herman, who used the hose to chill the orca with salt water. After soaking blankets in seawater, the rescuers carefully laid them down around the orca's body. As they worked, the rescuers saw that the orca's breathing was getting more relaxed and that her screams were decreasing. While her own family could only remain in the surrounding waters and call to her, the humans appeared to have gained the orca's confidence by consoling her. The rescuers alternated between changing the blankets covering the newborn orca with new cooler sheets dipped in the sea and pumping seawater over her. They used a pillowcase from Eric's boat to moisten the fin with seawater after seeing that the orca calf's dorsal was drying out. Luckily, the weather had been cloudy and dreary all morning, but when the sun reached its highest point at midday, the clouds broke up and the day's heat started to build. Working in shifts, everyone put forth endless effort to keep the orca cool and moist. The humans treated the orca as though she had a fever, changing her warmer, drier covers for cooler, wetter ones, and constantly spritzing her with salt water from the pump to keep her from drying out from the sun's heat. If Eric hadn't heard the young female orca's calls, the rescuers couldn't help but wonder how horrible things may have been for her. Because they didn't want the orca to fear, the rescuers hadn't put anything over her head until now. She could have felt even more exposed after having her sight abruptly taken away. But because of the sun's ferocity, it was imperative to shield the orca's sensitive skin from the dryness and heat. Janie recounts how she saw one of the crew members approach the orca, carefully putting a cold, damp sheet over her head without covering her blowhole as he crept quietly into the water in front of her head. This orca had the advantage of being young and tiny. Given that the usual lifespan in the wild is between 30 and 50 years, she was just 9 years old. She weighed around 7,000 pounds, 3,175 kilograms, which is equivalent to the weight of 7 cows, if you can better picture that, or the typical hippopotamus or rhinoceros. However, a mature adult may weigh up to 16,000 pounds, 7,257 kilograms. If this beached orca had been larger and older, her lungs would have been under more strain, and she would not have survived until the following tide. No matter how much duct tape Eric tried, the water pump finally failed and could not be fixed. This could have been a catastrophic blow, but the tide started to rise again at that very moment. It had taken 9 long hours, but the tide had risen enough that the rescuers could start releasing the juvenile orca. They took the pillowcase off of her dorsal fin and the sheets off of her head and torso. The crew was aware that the moment had arrived for the orca to swim out of her rocky prison, something that only she could achieve. They left and ascended onto a nearby cliff to observe and wait, as they did not want their presence to frighten her into attempting too soon and badly hurting herself. They were all in agreement, wishing her strength and wishing that she would be able to set herself free. The little orca was gradually submerged by the water as it crept up her body. As it happened, she started to scream again. This vocalization seemed unusual, maybe because she was excited about being freed shortly. Nevertheless, she kept lying there. Sometimes she would raise her tail, but she was not trying to swim. Her rescuers were starting to become anxious. They pondered whether there was a problem. Her injuries could have been more severe than they initially believed. Perhaps she was too exhausted from her lengthy suffering to make one final enormous attempt to get away. Then, they understood that all they had to do was rely on the orca calf's instincts. She had been checking the water's depth by wiggling her tail, and when she was certain it was safe and she wouldn't put herself in danger, she launched herself into 2 enormous thrusts. She raced across the sea, free of the rocks. Human rescuers rejoiced in relief and chanted, "You go, girl!" from where they stood, watching from their boats and on the cliffs surrounding her. They had succeeded. After almost 9 hours of diligent labor and gentle nurturing, they were able to maintain the baby orca alive and healthy until she was able to rejoin her pod. Eric was able to reproduce the rescue as the orca's song by submerging a hydrophone in the water. For a long, her voice was the only one heard as she repeatedly called for her family to respond. There was a moment of uncertainty and worry for Eric and his colleagues' miracle workers. Where was the juvenile orca's pod? After all this time on land, had they given up on her? Had they regrettably gone to swim away to lament her passing? A surge of relief swept over the waiting listeners as distant, weak responses to the rescued orca's calls began to be heard. The young woman clearly heard her family's responses as well, since she swam toward their fleeting shouts and sped off in delight and the rush of freedom. In their common feelings, the group of human rescuers stood united. They were overcome with pride at what they had accomplished together. They had all put forth their best effort. Knowing that what they had gone through that day would be with them all for the rest of their lives, they exhaled with relief. What a wonderful conclusion. Please remember to subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our videos. If you enjoyed the tale, the next video that plays on your screen will probably move you too.